Harry J. Benda Prize dari Association for Asian Studies. Isabella Hamad adalah seorang penulis yang karya terbarunya Recognizing the Stranger dan karya lainnya Novel Enter Ghost telah menerima penghargaan dari Aspen Prize, Clark Prize, and Encore Award. Ia telah mengajar sastra dan penulisan kreatif di New York University, Brown University, dan Al Quds Bard College. Karyanya telah didukung oleh Lannan Foundation, Columbia University's Institute for Ideas and Imagination, dan Dorothy and Lewis B. Kuhlman Center for Scholars and Writers di New York Public Library. Bunga Siagian, kurator dan produser budaya, yang tinggal dan bekerja di Jatiwangi dan Depok. Menyelesaikan studi masternya pada Ilmu Cultural Studies, memiliki ketertarikan dengan sejarah jaringan Asia Afrika, internasionalisme dunia ketiga, dan komitmen politik sinematik kelompok kiri pada era dekolonisasi. Praktik kekaryaannya sering mengambil bentuk institusi publik seperti Mother Bank dan Badan Kajian Pertanahan. Proyek riset artistik yang fokus pada isu perempuan dan pertanahan dengan menempatkan praktiknya pada titik temu antara seni dan pengamalan kerja kolektif. Pemandu, Intan Paramadita, penulis novel Gentayangan 2017, buku yang meraih English Pen Translates Award, nominasi Stella Prize, dan karya sastra prosa terbaik majalah Tempo. Karya-karyanya telah diterjemahkan ke dalam bahasa Inggris, Polandia, Turki, Thailand, Italia, dan Jepang. Kumpulan Cerpen Sihir Perempuan adalah buku pertamanya, terbit pada tahun 2005 dan masuk ke dalam 5 besar kusala sastra Katulistiwa. Sebagian cerpen Sihir Perempuan terbit dalam kumpulan cerpen Apple and Knife, bagian dari seri vintage classics Weird Girls. Intan merupakan penggagas dan pengelola Sekolah Pemikiran Perempuan, kolektif feminis dekolonial lintas Nusantara. Ia mendapat gelar doktor dari New York University dan bekerja sebagai dosen kajian media di Macquarie University Sydney. Novel terbarunya adalah Malam Seribu Jahanam 2023. Panduan Etik SPP. Panduan etik ini diterapkan dalam kegiatan-kegiatan Sekolah Pemikiran Perempuan. Tujuan diadakannya SPP adalah menciptakan ruang belajar dan berbagi yang inklusif, aman, nyaman, dan berani bagi beragam orang yang terlibat di dalamnya, juga bagi lingkungan hidup yang menopang kegiatan SPP. Kami mengajak semua yang terlibat untuk datang dengan keterbukaan dan sikap positif, serta selalu berpartisipasi secara konstruktif selama acara berlangsung. SPP berkomitmen dan berdedikasi untuk menyediakan lingkungan yang terbuka dan bebas dari pelecehan bagi semua orang maupun bagi alam raya. Untuk menjamin itu semua, maka kami tidak akan menerima perilaku-perilaku yang mengandung pemaksaan, pelecehan, dan kekerasan dalam bentuk apapun selama acara berlangsung. Kami akan mengambil tindakan tegas menanggapi pelanggaran-pelanggaran yang terjadi. Tata tertib di ruang acara. Para pemirsa acara dapat mengajukan pertanyaan di sesi tanya jawab. Bagi yang hadir di tempat bisa mengangkat tangan dan mengikuti panduan moderator. Pemirsa yang hadir di ruang daring dapat menuliskan pertanyaannya di kolom komentar. Anda dapat mengakses penerjemahan dari bahasa Inggris ke bahasa Indonesia melalui fitur Zoom.
Datang teman-teman semua. Welcome to our panel Rantau, the Bandung Legacy, Solidarity and Feminist Resistance. This panel is in English with Bahasa Indonesia and Indonesian Sign Language translations. This is the only English language panel of our festival, the Etalase Pemikiran Perempuan. The English translation is available on Zoom. So if you are on the Zoom webinar, you can select the Indonesian language channel to listen to Bahasa Indonesia translation. And if you are here in the room and you require Indonesian language translation, you can log onto the Zoom webinar. If you need help, please be in touch with the organizer. Okay, again, welcome to our feminist festival, the Etalase Pemikiran Perempuan, or Etalase. This is the 6th year of Etalase Pemikiran Perempuan, a space to circulate knowledge produced by women and non-binary individuals across the Indonesian archipelago. We focus on arts and culture with a spirit of crossing disciplinary, cultural, geographical, and generational boundaries. Etalase is a program of Sekolah Pemikiran Perempuan, or the School of Women's Thought, an initiative that creates an intervention in the processes of knowledge production that have marginalized, invalidated, and erased women, queer people, people with disability, and other minorities. We aim to engage in the act of epistemic disobedience against colonial, capitalist, and patriarchal structures of knowledge by centering the roles of women in the archipelago, in this case, feminists from the Global South, as valid producers of knowledge. My name is Intan Paramadita. I am a co-founder and co-organizer of Sekolah Pemikiran Perempuan, or the School of Women's Thought, the collective that organizes this festival. The Rantau panel, as I mentioned before, is the only panel in English language, and this panel is created to promote transnational feminist solidarity, because we, as a feminist collective in the Indonesian archipelago, we want to connect ourselves with the larger transnational feminist movements, feminist struggles around the world, and we are very honored to host this panel and to be able to speak with Taumojo, Isabella Hamad, and Bunga Siagian. If you have questions, for people on Zoom, you can use the Q&A feature, or you can write in the YouTube live chat. And if you are here, you can raise your hand. You can raise your hand in Indonesian, ask your question in Indonesian or English. If it's in Indonesian, we can translate your questions here. So here we have Taumo and Isabella. Hello, Taumo, Isabella. Yes, this is a hybrid event, and we are all here to see you. And hi, Bunga. Terima kasih. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. So just a reminder, this specific panel explores the intersection between the 1955 Bandung Conference transnational solidarity movements and feminist resistance in the Global South. The Bandung Conference is often celebrated as a pivotal moment in terms of third world struggles and solidarity. However, in that celebration, the history of feminist, anti-imperialist organizing outside Western paradigms remains largely forgotten or underexplored. So this panel will reflect on these histories and explore future dimensions, future directions for transnational feminist solidarity. How do we mobilize ourselves across boundaries to challenge colonialism, capitalism, and patriarchy? And how might we view Bandung and moments of anti-colonial solidarity in more critical ways from a feminist perspective? Okay, so we have our speakers. What I will do now, first of all, I will talk a little bit about the structure of this panel. This is more of a talk show. We will be here for 1 hour, 30 minutes. I will have a Q&A session with Taumo, Isabella, and Bunga, and maybe reintroduce them a little bit before each question. And then we will have a 30-minute Q&A with the audience. So without further ado, Yes, thank you, everyone, for being here. I think we can start with Taumo. You've been introduced before in Indonesian language, so maybe I will just reintroduce a little bit. Taumo Jo is an associate professor in the Department of Chinese Studies and Dean's Chair in the Faculty of Arts and Social Sciences, National University of Singapore. And she has won many awards for her book, Migration in the Time of Revolution, China, Indonesia, and the Cold War. Taumo, you've done research on the Cold War geopolitics, including the gender dimension, and your latest research focuses on Indonesian leftist feminist activist Francisca Fangide. You've written about Francisca looking at various angles, including, I think there are two aspects that I would like to highlight here. The one is her passport and how she, as a transnational feminist activist, she traveled on different passports, right? She used Indonesian passport, but then eventually she had to use forged documents. How do you reflect on Francisca's life as an activist, a leftist feminist activist who, you had this very difficult relationship with Indonesia, and how do we think about women's mobility in that time, in the Cold War period? And the other thing is that you've done research on Francisca, not only as an leftist activist, but also as a mother. And you've presented about, this idea of motherhood, the politics of motherhood. So how do we think about the Bandung history by looking at motherhood as something that complicates understandings around anti-colonial solidarity? Okay, Taumo, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Intan, for the thoughtful questions, and please just allow me to share my slides. Does it work?
Does that work? Yes. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Intan, for the questions and for the invitation. And I also like to thank the logistic team, particularly Barat, for handling all the logistic works. So it's a really great honor to share this panel with Isabella and Bunga, so both of whom I admire greatly. Let me just start by introducing this key figure at the heart of my sharing session today. So Francisca Fangide, for many of the Indonesian audience here, she might already be a somehow familiar figure. So Bu Ita, Fatia, Nadia, for example, Bu Ita discussed Francisca Fangide in the Pemikiran Perempuan Festival a few years ago. And this year is actually the 70-year anniversary of Bandung, also the 100-year birth anniversary of Francisca Fangide. So who is she? She's a senior cadre of the Indonesian Communist Party and a member of the Indonesian parliament. She actually represented Indonesia at three conferences that mark three inflection points in the Afro-Asian movement, namely the Calcutta Conference in 1948, the Afro-Asia Conference the second Afro-Asian Conference in Algeria in 1965, and the Tricontinental Conference in Havana in 1966. She was also a very active member of the Afro-Asia People's Solidarity Organization. She participated in Afro-Asian Women's Conference and contributed to Afro-Asian Journalists Association. So surprisingly, she's also a mother of 7 children. She left Indonesia in mid-September 1965 to attend a meeting of the International Journalist Organization meeting in Santiago, Chile. So due to the mass killing and subsequent rise of an anti-communist military dictatorship in Indonesia, she spent 19 years in political exile in China. So this is also the story of the passport, in the sense that her passport was canceled while she was in Havana, and Fidel Castro gave her a Cuban passport as a souvenir. So with that Cuban passport, she arrived in Beijing. However, her stay in China also took a dramatic turn. So shortly after her arrival, she was diagnosed with leprosy. So she actually spent 8 years in quarantine as a patient in a leprous colony in southern China. And in 1985, with a doctored, basically a fake passport, she migrated from China to the Netherlands, where she lived until her passing in 2013. So here we see kind of two sides of a woman's identity, right? So on one hand, Francisca Fangida is truly a pioneer woman politician and diplomat. She campaigned for Indonesia's national independence in her youth, and her first passport was actually just a makeshift booklet issued by the nascent Republic of Indonesia. Later, she became a governmental representative carrying a diplomatic passport, participating in Afro-Asian conferences and also socialist, intellectual, and cultural exchanges. So her transnational activism challenged the stereotypical understanding of the Bandung era as this global network that is largely a homosocial space. But on the other hand, she was arguably unfit mother. Why? Because of her long absence from her children's life. So in my recent work, as Inta mentioned, I focus on understanding the Bandung era from the perspective of maternal experiences and emotions, particularly with the focus on the concept of politics of maternal absence. So what do I mean by politics of maternal absence? So I'm a mother. I think Intan is also a mother. I'm a mother of two small children. At this very moment, I'm away from my children. So how I see myself and how others see me, see other mothers who are away from their children, are largely influenced by a state's gender ideologies, reproductive policies, and welfare provisions. In other words, whether these mothers should be condemned, condoned, or celebrated, this very much reflect what kind of society each government wants to build. So in the Bandung era, during this decolonizing colonizing process, newly independent nation states such as Indonesia, they constructed and mobilized the image of absent mother in their nation building and decolonial war-making projects. So what absent mothers like Francisca experience in their emotional world, in their inner life, actually can show us a lot about how different post-colonial states frame absent mothers, frame maternal absence in different ways to engineer political, social, and economic transformation they envision. So reframing the history of Bandung through the lens of motherhood reveals that actually the rise and fall of this Bandung idea were inherently gendered processes with gender consequences. The Bandung era opened up possibilities for women like Francisca to combine motherhood and political activism, and for their activism to be recognized as expression or extension of their maternal roles. However, the fall of Third World internationalism or Bandung ideals triggered a normative shift in motherhood ideologies. So after 1965 in Indonesia, the anti-communist Soeharto regime framed politically active mothers as unnatural, unseemly, while enshrining home-centered mothers as the key to stabilizing the family unit. So to conclude, Francisca's story helps us bring motherhood to the front and center of our understanding of the Bandung era. In the mid-20th century, Afro-Asian movements advocated for the transformation of post-colonial societies through a more equitable division of reproductive labor. The fall of third world internationalist movements signal not just a missed opportunity to reframe global geopolitics, but also a lost moment to reimagine motherhood. So thank you. That's the end of my sharing.
Presentation on Francisca Fangide, and for highlighting what we might have overlooked with the whole celebration of Bandung conference as a state-led initiative. You highlighted this idea of the missed opportunity to reimagine motherhood. So it seems that there's, in the story of Francisca Fangide, there's this conflation between the personal and the political, and this is, I would like to move to Isabella now, because you have been exploring this issue, the conflation between the personal and political. I would like to go back a little bit to your novel. The last one was Enter Ghost, which was shortlisted for the 2024 Women's Prize for Fiction. It seems to be a personal story of a diasporic Palestinian woman, visiting the West Bank, and then she was involved in the production of Hamlet. But it wasn't just a personal travel story. It was very political. It raised questions about what it means to make art under occupation, with facing checkpoints and roadblocks, etc. And what's interesting in your work is that memory and history are major themes, and how they're often presented through the perspective of women. So let's talk about your novel, your upcoming novel, and I was privileged to hear a little bit about this novel. You visited Indonesia as well for this novel's research, and it is set in 1965 Bandung conference. But what's interesting is that it doesn't focus on those powerful male leaders, but rather the novel focuses on a secretary and a photographer, two women, and these are interestingly figures who were sort of invisible in official histories. So Isabella, can you talk more a little bit about this novel, why focusing on these characters, and whether you have something to say about what we have overlooked when we talk about Bandung as a site of resistance?
Okay. Can you hear me?
Yes, thank you.
Well, first of all, thank you so much for inviting me. And I wish I could be there with you in person. But I'm delighted to participate in this conversation. And of course, I'm a novelist rather than a scholar, even though my novels have something scholarly about them. But my primary tool with investigating these histories is the tool of imagination. So I'm going to tell you a little bit about the book, which is not finished. So I'm still also in the process of discovering and learning. But I first became interested in Bandung in the conference while thinking about situating the Palestinian Nakba or catastrophe of 1948, when Zionist militias ethnically cleansed Palestine of Palestinians and founded the Israeli state, in the context of anti-imperial struggles across the rest of the colonized world. And naturally, that led me to the Asia-Africa Conference at Bandung of 1955, the so-called Bandung Spirit, and the various ways in which this conference has been remembered, misremembered, or in some cases not remembered at all. And there are, of course, so many different stories that can be told about this one event, so many different versions, as of any history, different meetings that can be constellated, friendships, rivalries, encounters. And I found myself, as you were saying, more interested in exploring an incidental marginal meeting than one of the central interactions. And that's partly because as a novelist, I believe that major historical figures usually make better bit parts than main characters. But it's also because I'd read that there were no women at the conference. And it's true that when you look at most pictures of the plenary sessions and the street parades, you see men besides Indira Gandhi, Nehru's daughter, and some wives and waitresses. And then I saw this photograph, which says, Miss Nahas, Lebanese delegate. And I asked a historian who had written about the absence of women at Bandung, who this might be. And she conceded that she must be a delegate. And I decided to make her one of my protagonists. And I discovered eventually that there were two women in the Lebanese delegation, Nahas and Salma Jordob, who is the sister of Angela Jordob, who was in the UN Commission on Women and is the aunt of a historian, a Lebanese historian called Philip Khoury. So I spoke to Philip Khoury, and he helped me try and track down some information about Miss Nahas, and I couldn't find anything about her. And I found myself quite blocked in trying to write about her because I didn't know her first name. And eventually, my Indonesian historian colleague, Kelana Wisnu, found her in the archive in Jakarta and told me that her first name was Sonia, which was unfortunately the name of the protagonist in my previous novel. And I took this as a sign from the universe or from the archive that I needed to stop pretending to be a historian and I should get back to being a novelist. The second protagonist of the book is an Indian female photojournalist who I have invented, but is similarly inspired by a source, this time certainly incorrect, which placed Homai Veerawala, considered the first woman Indian professional photographer at Bandung. But photography has become one of the most interesting resources for me. And it's almost always because a photograph gives the lie to a claim in a text, or that captures something unrecorded elsewhere in the corner of an image or accidentally. There are accounts that say, so-and-so wasn't there, like Al-Hajj Amin al-Husseini wasn't at Bandung because he's not listed in any of the lists of delegates. But then you see a photograph of him and you know he was there as an observer. So there's a way in which photographs have been an incredibly interesting resource for me in working on this project. So taking one of my protagonists as a press photographer opens up an array of possibilities of treating this history through the issue of its recording. So a challenge that I've obviously been conscious of, this is just, to describe a little bit of my artistic method, is the question of being too driven by ideas. And obviously, I'm very interested in engaging with scholars and reading history books, talking to historians, and I do primary research with interviews with people who lived the histories that I'm writing about. But the question becomes how to make the ideas part of the architecture of the book. So, for example, coming up against a wall in trying to track down Sonia Nahas led me to incorporate her vanishing into the structure of the book. So part 2 of the novel is a kind of detective plot or vanishing woman story in which my photographer character goes looking for the disappeared Miss Nahas in Lebanon in 1966. And this allows me also to do something else with history, which I'll come to in a moment. But I'm not here trying to do a Saidiya Hartman-esque critical fabulation. There's nothing overtly metafictional about the book. I do not deliberately gesture at the archive and its absences. I was simply confronted with the condition of possibility of writing about this woman, and when she vanished from the archive, so to speak, possibly because she stopped working or because she married and changed her name, but in any case, certainly because she's a woman, this, like a coin tossed onto the I Ching, determined one formal property of the novel. So to return to the question of whether Miss Nahas was a delegate or a secretary, I think it's pretty certain that she was a secretary. But I think that the blurriness or the deliberate ambiguity over her status, combined with the very clearly Western clothes that she's wearing, indicates something about the Lebanese delegation itself, which in the context of the Middle East and in Asia at large, the Christian Lebanese at the time were seeking to the patronage of the West and to stay close to the West, whether that was to France as the previous colonial power or to the United States in the context of the Cold War. And the largest character, so to speak, in the Lebanese delegation at Bandung was a diplomat called Charles Merlik, architect of the Declaration of Human rights, which he was very proud of. But he was also an Americanophile and very, very worried about the influence of communism and of political Islam in the Middle East. He was also Edward Said's uncle by marriage. And by the 1970s, he had allied with the right-wing Christian Lebanese, the Kataib, against the Palestinians. So I also am interested in tracking the what seems to be a contradiction, to a liberal Western reader, this would seem like a contradiction that you're a liberal human rights framework, and then you're against the Palestinians and allying with the fascists. But actually, it's perfectly contiguous when you look closely. So I was interested in what this ambiguity about the role of women in the delegation might signify about the positioning of the Lebanese delegation and their sense of themselves as the West of the East. And a sense of superiority about the position of their women. What it allows me then to do also in part 2 of the novel is to explore the ways that such a woman from such a background might then become involved in a political struggle outside a status framework, and to in fact be involved in an armed struggle, a leftist armed struggle, which would not have been unusual for a woman of that background at the time. So it allows me to kind of look at some of the complications of these histories as they relate to both the status framework, its relationship with the West in the context of the Cold War, and how things develop over the course of the subsequent 10 years.
Okay, right. Thank you, Isabella, for sharing the creative process or research process of your new book. I'm sure that many people here are eager to read the book immediately when it comes out. But what's interesting is that I think we've been talking a lot about the idea of ghosts vanishing, or at least vanishing in terms of your work, vanishing stories from of women from the Bandung conference itself, and also from the archives, or vanishing in terms of invisibility, right? Invisibility of motherhood narrative, or the attempt to frame motherhood in a certain way in Indonesia. So I'm really interested in this because ghosts are actually prominent themes in our festival this year. Like yesterday, we talked about voices from the grave, and I think the idea of ghosts and the vanishing, or the buried, these will be coming back in our festival. But now I'm going to turn to Bunga. I'm not sure if you will evoke some ghosts as well, but you were definitely you are definitely interested in the question of women's knowledge during this era, the Cold War period, and you did your research on the Afro-Asian Film Festival, and you examined how cinema became a vehicle for third world political expression, and, as well as ways of centering women's knowledge and experience. So do you want to talk about, and I know that you are working with women collective as well, but we'll get to that. Now maybe you can tell us a little bit about your interest in third world cinema or third cinema, and how that allows resistance to patriarchal colonial structures in the Cold War period.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Kak Intan, for the introduction, and also I want to acknowledge the effort of the organizer to provide a space for this. I think this is the most discussed topic of this year, Bandung things, because it's not because this is very important moment in our third world history, but I think because Bandung also provide certain kind of imagination how to create a new structure to provide us to survive and also to create new alliance against this imperialism and colonialism in today's context. And yeah, I will share about my research on the Afro-Asia Film Festival. And first of all, I want to locate the festival in a more broader context, so you can imagine where was the festival position actually in the global film festival at that time. So this is the list of the film festival networks from 50s to 70s that have, the same spirit. This is mostly from the third world countries and also from socialist bloc. And we also are involved in this network actually through this Afro-Asia Solidarity Film Festival network called Afro-Asia Film Festival. So this is like a circuit of film festival, started from 58 and ended in 64 in Jakarta. So of course this is embed the Bandung spirit because this is under one of the organizers from this Bandung network called APSO, Afro-Asia People Solidarity Organization. And it's supposed to have the 4th edition in Pyongyang, but of course it was a failed project because of the head of the Cold War at that time. And we almost know all of this network, all of this film festival, but we don't really know about the Afro-Asia Solidarity this film festival because I think we have, like in a certain moment in the film history, it's really difficult to talk about national cinema because this is a state project, and you can see like the other. Of course, there were some of state project as well. For example, the Tashkent Film Festival, but the race is mostly, just civil or the society project. But this Afro-Asia Film Festival funded by the state, when organized by the state. So it's really difficult conversation to talk about national cinema. Because, like mostly in the 80s, for example, and also the decline of the third world project at that time in the 80s, 90s, so people just don't find urgency to talk about this failed third world project at that time. Okay, next. But I will specifically focusing on this third Afro-Asia Film Festival that was held in Jakarta. And I put the context there. Of course, this is a part of this Bandung Conference articulations, and also we were in the third world building project. It's also and also the period of the 50s to 70s. I think it was the peak of the decolonization struggle in the continent, Afro-Asia continent. And to give you more specific context as well, like in the 64, I think half of the continent were still under colonization at that time. So this is a very important project for the Afro and Asia in the cultural scenes. Next. Okay, half of the delegation that came to the festival didn't bring films actually because they were still under colonization, and some didn't start the film industry at that time, especially from the African part. And so the delegates coming for the same objective at that time to talk about the decolonization process and also how to build the Afro-Asia film industry that basically they imagine it will be different, totally different from the existing structure of the Hollywood cinema, for example, that were really dominating the infrastructure and also the market at that time. And they were really thinking, so these third world filmmakers, the third world ecosystem in the film scenes at that time gathered together in Jakarta and to talk about not only thinking about how to make a good films or what kind of films that could be an alternative from this Hollywood cinema, but also thinking what kind of infrastructure that we could provide that could string our struggle together against this colonization, against imperialism, and so on and so on. So this is an excerpt from like some of the speech from the delegates. We have the Vietnam, we have this China, we have some Indonesia. So you can feel or you can sense the focus of their presence at that time. So they really consider film as as a bond or to string a relationship or friendship between the people of Asia, Africa, and like many things that basically the same, that they imagine their own culture at that time. They imagine to build third world culture and how films or cinema were really involved on that struggle. And next, in short, so they really think about to build a new cinema for the new world. Because I think this is a big project at that time for the third world countries. But the question is, what kind of new cinema for this new world? We know that new world is a word that free from imperialism, colonialism, and on all those kind, the old value that sadly still exists till now. And so the question is how to build this new cinema within this the film festival. I'm using the word of third world cinema instead of third cinema because we already have like a certain kind of imagination about third cinema, and also it's centered on the Latin America history. But I think for the third world cinema is more flexible and more fluid. So this word is actually create like a sum of probability for us to reclaim the history. Because when we refer to the third world cinema, of course it's not about a cinema that coming from the third world countries, but I think it's important to think to make a connection between the third world as a project and as an ongoing project and the third world cinema. So I found this film festival as a platform to birthing this kind of third world cinema that coherent with the third world project itself. Okay, so what I did is actually I think in the structure of the film festival, the ideology or the objective of film festival could be accessed through the winners of the film festival. So you can see or you can understand the ideology of the film festival through the winners of the festival. So and then I try to see the archives of the winner, and it's really interesting that the award of the highest category in the film festival is called Bandung Award, and from 4 of the winners, 3 of them were talking about the woman's life, or the protagonists were women, and 1 is about collective, like a communal life in the Kalimantan. And so it's about collective and about women. So, but only 2 films from the winner, the film winner, could be accessed until now because 2 other films considered lost. But this one film from China and one film from Japan, you can access it, and you can see and you can assess how they provide a space for the woman knowledge and also woman experience as the main, I think, features from the third world cinema. And I think it's really important contribution from that period, because when we talk about the feminist filmmaking, we always refer to like this, the feminist wave in the West, but we never really studying this kind of film festival that, you know, in the periphery, because this is state project. Okay, next, yeah, this is the film from China. I think the Redetachment of Women is really interesting film, because this is a film that if you see the film with a certain kind of assumption or judgment, you will just put it as in a, okay, this is a propaganda film from China. But if you look at the film carefully, you will see women have a different role during revolution. They're not only holding a gun, they are not only involving in the revolution, but also doing like a different kind of care work. In some scenes, you will see them as an educator, because they have like a collective school for kids. And in other scenes, you will see them, all of these women doing farming. So they're trying to providing or to create the supporting system for the revolution. And on the other scene, they are really, share the affective scenes between women. So it's kind of like a sisterhood. They are supporting each other and so on and so on. So in here, the woman is really active to build their own life, and which is, it's really, it's a really important aspect from the revolution itself. And then the next film from Japan, you will see, this is a story about Seki, a peasant woman, and she's of course coming from the working class, and also the films were really focusing on her life and also her agency to know she's facing like a different kind of struggle, not only as a peasant in front of, inequality of the structure under this imperialism, but also she's facing, the threat in individual level, which is patriarchy from her family and so on. And she's trying how to deal with all of that at once, and it's really difficult task for her as a protagonist at that time. And I think next, okay. So this is what I think what I try to formulate from the third world cinema. I'm sorry, it's in Indonesia for Isabella and Tomo. But I think by looking at the winner films, you can see that all this, that we are as part of this third world society actually facing the same, or we are in the same geohistoric situation in front of colonialism, imperialism, feudalism, and for the woman in front of patriarchy. So it's like a multi-layer struggle for the woman. And then why the third world filmmakers and why the third world films were really focusing on the woman experience and woman knowledge, because the woman's body is just the ultimate locus of all of that, colonialism, imperialism, and at all. So just like the locus of the oppressed. And then by putting the woman as a locus of the oppressed, and then we produce I took this from the feminist epistemology, the epistemic privilege of the oppressed. So this is kind of experience and also knowledge that only could be produced within women experience. It could not be produced in man's experience, something like that. So I found it is really interesting from this film festival, and I tried to formulate how the film festival consciously choosing this film to represent their view about the third world cinema, because they consider film and film festival as a dialectical space between the objective condition and subjective condition, which is important at that time for us to have like imagination that rooted in the concrete realities, but also to have imagination how to free ourselves from all the oppression. And so the film, some films really present the objective reality, the everyday struggle of the Afro-Asia solidarity, so we can really sense or see the concrete, the material situation, but also present subjective realities, which is we could see in the rate detachment of women. It accommodates or it provides an imagination how to work together, how to create a collective, how to do something within the context of revolution, and how to create a new world, actually. And so this is important, but also to provide kind of imagination how to free ourselves from the oppression or daily, everyday oppression in front of patriarchy, which is maybe far from the narrative of the national liberation movement. And so this is that I found really interesting, like this dialectical space between the objective realities and the subjective realities. Next. But I think I would like to focusing as well, because this is like an open space, actually, the film festival. This is a film festival that we could share the same history between Indonesia, as a state, between Indonesia as a state, between leftists, because this is organized by the leftist group, and between us, a woman. And so I will just focusing on the methodology that provided by Gerwani when they say that this kind of festival is actually is a red light. So you can see that this is like a method how to read a film festival that really stopping capitalist infrastructure and imperialist structure at that time. So it's really stopping all the structure and infrastructure. And I saw this practice as an insurgent feminism that tried to unsettle existing power structures in order to imagine like a new life and new collectives and new epistemology, new communities, new structure, and so on and so on. So I think this kind of insurgent feminism that I think inspired me to do my practice today, which is okay, if the existing structures is not or enable like a different kind of operation in the daily lives, how to actually to build your own structure. So I think that's what I did with my project with Mother Bank and so on and so on, because it's try to imagine like a different way of life and how to hijack the existing structure of this old conventional bank, and we create our own bank. So I think that's it's too long. Thank you.
Thank you, Bunga. So thank you for sharing about your project and also the Afro-Asian Solidarity Film Festival Network, which is really a critique of epistemology. And it's also offering the third world way of thinking and dreaming, imagining how we may resist imperialism, capitalism, and colonialism. I have a set of questions, but I think I'm very aware of the time, so I'm just going to move to the discussion session. So we will take questions from the audience. If not, I can always go back to my questions. Maybe we can start with people in the room, and then if there are questions from the Zoom room, we can also take those questions. So anyone, you can ask questions in English or in Bahasa Indonesia. Any questions? Not yet. Do we have questions from Zoom? Okay, no questions yet. Okay, so I think maybe we can go back to the idea of how the spirit of Bandung is rejuvenated today. There's this movement called From Bandung to Palestine, how we think about our contemporary condition by reflecting on the past. This is very important, but at the same time, I hope what we are doing here today is really, on the one hand, celebrating anti-colonial struggle, but on the other hand, we want to move away from the romanticization of the Bandung Conference itself, and sort of moving away from the masculine, state-centered narrative. Maybe we can explore. Is there anything else that we missed from looking at the past, looking at anti-colonial solidarity? What would a feminist reading of anti-colonial solidarity look like? And you can respond. This is for Isabella, Taumo, and Bunga. You can respond to the question in a more flexible way. Maybe you can also explore anything that we haven't had the chance to explore. Who would like to start? Maybe we can start with. We did start with Taumo. Maybe Isabella. Oh, sorry. I think we can't hear you.
Sorry, I thought you can hear me now.
Okay, yes.
So I think one thing that I wanted to add, which is perhaps a very obvious thing to point out, but I think has been very important for my thinking as I spend time trying to inhabit this period, which, to be perfectly honest, has been very important for me in this moment when the time of the ongoing genocide in Gaza, to go and inhabit a time when some state boundaries weren't exactly set, things were quite fresh, people were thinking how to make the world in the aftermath of empire, how to relate to one another diplomatically. There is a sense of kind of freedom and involvement, and which has been, at the same time, obviously, you look at the history and you can see how things are going to develop, but there's also something freeing and liberating in going back to the history while, as you say, making sure not to be too romantic about it. I mean, I think that there is certainly, I don't want to write a text that is, in a novelistic way, screaming at like one of the people at the side of the road, screaming at the side of Gamal Abdel Nasser like a movie star. But I also think that some of the revisionist perspective on Bandung, which sees it only as full of realpolitik, without really kind of properly grasping the emotive, the spiritual, the political significance of it at the time. I think there has to be some way for me to look at both of these things at the same time. And I think the novel is particularly situated for that. But what I wanted to add, which is the obvious point, is the simple fact of meeting. And I say this obviously being very conscious that we're in touch with you over Zoom, which is very different from being with you in person. Of course, it's a miracle of technology, but I think we would have a very different interaction if Tamo and I were there with you in the room. And I'm interested in the act of meeting and what that does to consciousness. Obviously, the novel as a form is concerned with with uh, with human consciousness, but also the ways in which human beings relate to one another. And I am interested in, having written two novels about Palestine directly. I'm interested in sort of tearing apart or troubling the marriage between the novel as a literary form and the history of the nation or of national consciousness, and thinking about the ways in which we might do a novel internationally, so to speak, and think about the ways in which the novel explores the complex ways we make each other, and how might Bandung be a stage for this and this encounter across difference, which is not that over familiar one of East and West, but rather East or South. And this is maybe an obvious thing to point out, but I think it inaugurates something with its limitations as a meeting. It obviously did inaugurate. It triggered a number of conferences and solidarity organizations, the non-aligned movement, and this history that you all know very well afterwards. But for me, that retrieving that thing of meeting in person, and especially in a digital age when nowadays there's so much interaction online that isn't in person, I think this is very damaging for our movements and for the left in general, because there's so much space for miscommunication, for misidentification. And there's something about the diplomatic encounter or the chance encounter in person that has a very profound effect on the mind and the political imagination. It's a bit of maybe an obvious point, but I think it's, for me, one of the most profound things in imagining, in going back to this period and imagining the 50s and 60s and international interactions among women across the global South.
Thank you so much, Isabella, also for provoking this idea of meeting. This is also an ongoing question in our feminist collective, because we have been very much facilitated by virtual meetings because they are cheap and we don't have much money. So the Indonesian archipelago is big, and the only way that we could gather all these women is through Zoom meetings. But now we are very privileged to meet face to face, and that's definitely very different in terms of the corporeal encounter, a corporeal experience, and what it does to solidarity. But yeah, maybe something to explore further. But Taumo, would you like to share or to add something, maybe things that we haven't discussed?
Well, thank you so much, Intan. I really enjoy Isabella and Bunga's presentation. It's so rich and inspiring. I think several ideas pop up to me. One thing is what Bunga mentioned, like the feminist infrastructure, right? So Bandung very much, the network it cultivates rely upon this infrastructure of mobility. But if you think about it, these infrastructure were actually not built for women, right? So it's really difficult for women to travel for international conferencing, largely due to like financial constraints, but also caretaking duties, right? So like Francisca Fangide, the woman I discussed, or the secretary in the Lebanon delegation, Isabella discussed, these are more privileged women with a more kind of better social economic background that enable their international traveling. So I think feminist infrastructure, especially like the mother bank Bunga discussed, is definitely a very interesting direction we can look as part of the legacy of Bandung. Another thing is, I think the idea I pick up from Intense comment on visibility, right? So, Bandung, of course, as a diplomatic historian, is significant, was so huge. But I think another feminist critique might be that, anti-imperialist struggle perhaps didn't need to just take stage in podiums, in conference halls, but can also take place in kitchens, right? In nurseries or in invisible space, such as the sound space of radio or the virtual space of our current Zoom platform, right? I think what Francisca Fangida story told us is that Bandung not only provided us with a different political vision, but also a different feminist vision for care work. That is his term, like socialist maternalism, which means that regardless of gender and biology, every one of the society should take part in this social reproductive labor. Childcare is a collective labor, right? It's societal. It shouldn't be narrowed down to just one single mother. So I do think this idea of like socialist maternalism or multiple mothering, collective mothering, or the idea that caretaker mothers shouldn't be at the lowest rung of all this power hierarchy in each society. That could be one direction that a feminist legacy of Bandung could be carried on.
Yeah, thank you so much, Tomo. Thank you for highlighting that Bandung itself depends on this infrastructure of mobility. So it's really about the questions of who can travel, right? Who can represent? And thanks for bringing this idea that we need to interrogate meeting spaces because, well, does it have to be conferences? Can we meet in the kitchens and create revolution from the kitchen? So. Maybe before we move to Bunga, maybe we'll take one question from Mbak Ita. Yes. Yeah, and then we'll move to Bunga.
Terima kasih, saya pakai bahasa Indonesia saja. Terima kasih, kebetulan saya dan Ruas sedang menulis tentang kontribusi atau traveling internationalism and solidarity of the Bandung. Dan saya fokus kepada gerakan perempuan Indonesia dalam Konferensi Asia Afrika tahun 55. Saya kira Taumo berbicara tentang Francisca Fangida, tetapi kami di Ruas sedang meneliti tentang pergerakan seluruh perempuan Indonesia. Ya, jadi di Bandung ketika tahun 55 sebetulnya sudah dimulai tahun 47 ketika Herawati Diah kemudian ada 4 perempuan pergi ke New Delhi dan kemudian melakukan mengunjungi konferensi perempuan di New Delhi. Kemudian ada konferensi setelah New Delhi 49 di Beijing. Ada 12 perempuan Indonesia yang datang. Kemudian perempuan ke Berlin. Jadi proses Bandung tidak serta-merta tiba-tiba Bandung. Tetapi ada satu proses panjang sebelumnya dari tahun 47, 48, 49, 55, 58 itu adalah konferensi Asia Afrika di Mesir yang ketua dari Indonesia adalah Maria Ulfah dan Maria Ulfah kemudian diangkat sebagai ketua komite di dalam Asia Afrika. Yang menarik di sini adalah beberapa orang yang sudah memikirkan tentang hak reproduksi dan seksualitas yang itu disampaikan oleh Ibu Dr. Hurustuti Subandrio sebagai doktor lulusan LSI, kemudian mengangkat isu soal seksualitas dan feminisme dan reproductive rights itu di Konferensi Asia Afrika. Jadi Konferensi Asia Afrika yang khusus untuk perempuan secara perspektif feminis itu meninggalkan konferensi yang utamanya yaitu tentang anti-neokolonialisme. Tapi yang menarik lagi adalah bagaimana pertemuan antara Kumari Jayawardani, seorang wartawan yang sangat terkenal yang menulis tentang gerakan perempuan dunia ketiga dari Sri Lanka, Francisca Fangida, kemudian satu jurnalis dari India, dan beberapa orang dari Afrika yang berkumpul untuk melanjutkan konferensi berikutnya di Ghana, ya. Kemudian Francisca terbang, kemudian dia juga melakukan beberapa komunikasi tentang bagaimana pemikiran perempuan. Tapi tahun 60 ada konferensi besar di Jakarta. Itu konferensi besar tentang anti-neokolonialisme. Dan di situ komunikenya ada 7 komunike tentang bagaimana perempuan masuk ke dalam gerakan non-blok, ya. Nah, ini menarik ya, bagaimana perjalanan pemikiran feminisme di Indonesia. Memang saya dan Ruas fokus untuk bagaimana feminis Indonesia ketika itu, istilah Jawanya adalah wirawiri, ya, mengunjungi seluruh gerakan solidaritas internasionalisme dan berpikir tentang bagaimana mengangkat persoalan-persoalan perempuan. Jadi ada sekian puluh perempuan. Kebetulan saya tadi dari kuburan disuruh Lisa, terus saya ke sini tanpa bawa catatan. Jadi tadi saya disuruh Lisa untuk ke kuburan. Jadi saya mau mengatakan bahwa Indonesia itu menjadi bagian poin penting dalam gerakan feminis internationalism and solidarity, dan tidak hanya Francisca Vanggide, ada Setiati Surasto, ada Hurustiati yang mengusung tentang sexual rights and reproductive right, ada Ibu Panggabean yang dibunuh, kemudian ada beberapa nama yang sebetulnya Ruas sedang menuju ke sana. Nah, nanti bulan September saya harus pergi lagi ke Belanda untuk melihat kembali proses perjalanan dari ini melampaui batas-batas negara, saya lupa ada. Jadi bagaimana feminisme Indonesia ketika itu sudah beyond dari keindonesiaan. Itu yang saya kira sangat penting sekali untuk diketahui dan diangkat untuk menjadi pengetahuan bersama. Juga masalah Palestina juga sudah diangkat ketika itu. Juga tentang kemerdekaan juga, ya. Jadi ini seluruh, saya pikir sekarang kalau saya sebagai feminis, saya kira mundur ke belakang pemikiran kita. Mereka sudah melampaui sana. Saya kira itu yang ingin saya share saja tentang bagaimana saya dan Ruas sedang menuliskan satu buku perjalanan feminis Indonesia dalam Konferensi Asia Afrika dan bagaimana hubungannya dengan gerakan-gerakan perempuan di Asia dan juga di Afrika. Seperti itu. Terima kasih.
Yes. Thank you, Ibu Ita Fatiana Dia. Ibu, oh ya. Kakak. we are, okay, so before we move to Bunga, I will probably just summarize for Isabella and maybe Tomo, you might pick up some points, but also from some of the audience here. But basically, Ibu Ita and her collective, Ruas, or the Space for Women's History and Archive, is that the translation? Ruas, the Space for Women's History and Archive. They have been doing research on Indonesia's women's movement, and that women have been actively participating in international solidarity movement since 1947, and that Indonesian women were actually at the forefront of feminist internationalism, and they talked about various issues from sexual rights, reproductive rights, including decolonization and Palestine. So it was, for Ibu Ita, it was like, it was beyond what we have achieved today, perhaps. So we really should learn from the past. And it wasn't only Francisca Vanggide, which whose story has been shared by Taumo. There were other women really on the forefront of internationalism. Maybe we don't have time for another question, but I would like to hear from Bunga. Is there anything that we missed, and is there anything you would like to add before we close this?
Yeah, back to the question about Bandung. I think for me, from Bandung until now, it's actually a continuing and continued process. And so because this is pretty much related with the question of our situation today, for example, why we don't read African novel, why we don't watch African films, why we are not familiar with African Pan-Africanism, and so on and so on. It means we are still dealing with racism, we are still dealing with the Eurocentric as a center of knowledge, and so on. As I'm coming from the cultural studies, I think the Asian cultural studies offer comparative method between the inter-Asian and intercontinental, the Afro-Asia. I think it's really important for us to look at our neighbor, which is share the same history, which is providing a brilliant theories actually about decolonization, about post-colonialism, and so on and so on. So I think it's really good to continuing the work of this Afro-Asia solidarity actually by, to look at the African history, to look at their theories, to look at our shared moment in the history where we were really connected to each other and we were really building the new infrastructure that providing our activists, our artists to work together. For example, the Afro-Asia, I think it's a Lotus Journal, for example, for the Afro-Asian writers, why they are not accessed anymore today. I think this is still ongoing question, and it's sometimes, of course, we need to look back to the history where all of this started, Bandung, because this is the first intercontinental cooperation. Because before we worked closely to each other, but within one continent, and Bandung was really the first time in the history that we were intercontinental. So I think, yeah, sometimes we visit how it started, but the question is actually how to keep the ongoing project and ongoing process of this Afro-Asia relationship.
Yeah, thank you so much, Bunga. And I agree that we should undo the way that we gain knowledge, the way that we acquire knowledge. Often we forget that we need to learn from each other, from our fellows in Africa, and we really forget that it's the connection has been there. It's just that we do not have access, or we forget that we have access to the connection. But maybe one. There are some questions. I apologize that we don't have much time to take all these questions, but it seems that many people are really interested in your work, the three of you. Could you, as a final word, you can also mention any final words you want, a closing statement maybe, but could you please share where to access your work? Maybe, Isabella, when is your novel coming out? Taumo, I know that your work on Francisca Fangide has been published, and you too, Bunga. So can you share a little bit on how people can find you? Yeah, we're not taking that. Thank you. Find your work. Maybe we'll start with Bunga. How do people learn more about your work?
I wrote one article about this film festival. I think you can find it in my Instagram. I put the link there. But also, yeah, because I'm also an artist, so I mostly work with the artistic articulation from this topic. So, yeah, I don't know, maybe it's like visit exhibition or just visit my programs and something like that.
Okay, so check Bunga's Instagram account. You will find more updates on her research and her artistic work. Maybe Taumo, how about you?
Oh, thank you so much, Intan. So I'm an academic. I write boring academic journals articles. So as you mentioned, I wrote about Francisca's task force in a very interesting and very, I would say, provocative edited volume by my colleagues Celine Lewis and Caroline Stowe, Lives of Afro-Asia. Is a very, very interesting collection that look at Bandung differently from bottom up bottom up conferences to kind of affective, emotive aspects of Afro-Asianism. I also have a forthcoming article on Francisca Fangide, Through the Lens of Motherhood. It's going to be published by American Historical Review, which is an academic journal.
Thank you. Isabella? When is your novel
yes,
coming
I just
out?
wanted to. My novel, I don't know yet. I haven't finished it. Hopefully next year, but I can't promise. We don't know. But I just wanted to respond to Bu Ita as well, who I had the privilege of meeting a couple of years ago when I came to Indonesia, just because I appreciate this contribution so much and pointing out the involvement of women in political organizing and liberation projects prior to the emergence of the statist framework, which is then obviously hijacked largely by men. But there was on the reports on the Bandung conference in the New York Times. There was an article called "No Women Delegates Among 600 at Bandung," and immediately there was a letter to the editor from someone called Leila Rosad, the charge d'affaires in the Indonesian delegation to the UN, saying this is not true. There are two women in the Indonesian delegation, Mrs. Maria Ulfa Santoso and Mrs. Puja Buntoro. And she says, "I'm particularly eager to clarify this point, since we Indonesian women are proud of the fact that, whether in the kitchens or in the highest offices of the land, we share fully in the development of our country and the conduct of our national life." So I like that it's in the record, even though the headline of the New York Times, which is incorrect and is not very covertly pejorative, led the way in claiming that there were no women there. But my book, I hope I will finish it this year. I'm currently in Lebanon, and I've been, investigating 1966, and obviously I'm thinking about the legacy of Bandung in the Arab world specifically. So I don't know how long this will take me, but I hope that I'll be finished by the end of the calendar year.
Thank you so much, Isabella, and thanks for sharing that. I think we need to know that about Maria Ulfa. And I hope that the three of us could meet in person. I think it's such a powerful discussion. I wish both of you were here. So thank you so much to our panelists, Taumo Joel, Isabella Hamad, and Bunga Siagian. Thank you for your thoughtful reflections, very powerful. Thank you for everyone joining us, both in person here at Tempuran and virtually from places around the world, and deep appreciation to the entire team behind the scenes who made this session of Rantau possible. So the struggle continues, and so does our collective commitment to justice, care, and transnational sisterhood. Before we close, we kindly invite all participants to fill out the feedback form that will be shared shortly. I hope that you enjoyed this session, and see you in the next session of Etalase Pemikiran Perempuan. We have more storytelling sessions, and also a specific session on Eastern Indonesian voices. Thank you very much. Terima kasih. Oh, take photos. How do we take photos? Oh, okay. So Isabella and Taumo, could you please stay, because we're going to take photos. I know this is a bit weird, but yeah, we want to take photos with you. So people can join us here.
Perancang isi, panggung pembuka manifesto, Intan Paramadita, Iswara Devanti. Riwayat Mupuan, Lisa Bonarahman, Tia Santi Kusumo. Rantau, Inta Paramadita, Asri Pratiwi Wulandari, Astrid Reza, Fatima Filza Izati. Panggung menatap dari timur, Margaret Rati Fernandes, Riana Rizky, Ilda Karwayu. Bongkar kata, Intan Paramadita, Asri Pratiwi Wulandari, Astrid Reza, Fatima Filza Izati. Pengantar tidur, Naomi Srikandi, Luna Karisma. Loka Karya, Lisa Bonarahman, Christine Tule, Nya Ina Raseki. Konser ceramah, Nya Ina Raseki, Ayu Permatasari, Desti Nursyam, Gema Suara Tayagita, Halida Visandra, Roshida Salsabila Andriana. Pasar Solidaritas, Anissa Sari, Sakdia Ma'ruf, Zuliani Evi, dan Niken. Mailani Sumelang. Penerjemah Bahasa Inggris Indonesia, Gladys Eliona Syahutari. Pengelola panggung, Mitae, Kanut, Evi Bahira. Pengelola registrasi, Anindita Hanadias. Pengelola logistik, Alosia Dila. Pengelola rekrutmen volunteer, Rizka Oktiana, Vera Yulia. Pengelola produksi teknis, Kuncung, Sony Sastronegoro, Kantor Lurah Ideaworks. Koordinator konsumsi, Freddy Hendra. Not tulis, Karlin Karmadina, Putu Dinda Ayudia. Fotografer, Cesarini. Videografer, Nurul Nelwan. Juru bahasa isyarat, Fai, Randi, Dina, Muiz, Nimas. Volunteer, Alfi Zanur Aisyah Irmanda, Aneta Vinola Cahyani, Atala Rafardanu, Cindy Kristina Amelia, Dwi Kinanti Laras Agustiningrum, Ega Sofiani, Faiza Torikul Habib, Hawa Nurawilya, Irfan Suranta Sinuraya. Isika Rahmania Luhri, Kairul Umami, Larasati Nur, Luki Maulana, Maria Al-Zahra, Mutiara Anissa, Nadia Karimata, Novi Fitri Yuliani, Nuria Hanik Fatika, Rindang Paradita, Ruth Patricia Beatrix, Santi Kartini, Widatul Fajaria, Yulia Puspita Sari.